Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
Life on the farm had always been predictable routine. I had lived through 59 summers and just as many winters, with no more excitement than the occasional barn fire or a stubborn calf refusing to be born. That was until Candy showed up. My niece, 25 and full of city life, stood on my front porch one afternoon with a suitcase in hand and a nervous smile on her face. "Uncle Tiller," she said softly, her voice catching a little as if she wasn't sure she'd be welcome here. I needed a break from the city. I hope it's okay. I wasn't one for expressing emotions, but I found myself nodding. "You're always welcome here, Candy," I said, moving aside to let her in. "Place hasn't changed much." Her eyes took in the old farmhouse, its weathered walls and creaking floorboards. "I like that it hasn't." At first, I didn't think much of it. She helped me with the chores, throwing herself into the work with a kind of focus I hadn't expected. She laughed even when she struggled with something, and there was something about her laughter that felt both familiar and strange. I should have been relieved to have company, but instead, I found myself on edge. There was something in the air, a tension I couldn't quite explain. One evening after dinner, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she sat with me on the porch, sipping tea. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. "So how long are you planning on staying?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I don't know yet," she replied, her voice soft. I needed to get away for a while, think about some things. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to, but I felt something shift between us that night, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then Harland showed up the next day, swaggering over from the neighboring farm like he always did when he smelled an opportunity. "Well, ain't this a pretty sight?" Harland drawled, his eyes moving over Candy in a way that made my skin crawl. "Didn't know you had company, Tiller." "She's my niece," I said sharply, stepping between them, but I could already see the way his eyes lingered on her. I didn't like it. Not one bit. Candy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harland," she said politely, though I could tell she was uncomfortable. I glared at Harland, my fists clenching at my sides. "What do you want, Harland?" He shrugged, his smirk widening. "Just being neighborly." I knew then that things were about to get complicated. After Harland's unwelcome visit, things between Candy and me grew strange. The easygoing rhythm we'd settled into felt off-kilter, like something was pulling us in directions neither of us knew how to navigate. She was my niece, blood, but every time we worked together in the barn or walked through the fields, there was a closeness that went beyond family ties. One afternoon, as we were stacking hay bales, I caught Candy looking at me, her gaze lingering longer than it should have. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves that her attention stirred in me. "You're getting good at this," I said, forcing a smile. "Almost a farmhand." She laughed, the sound light and soft. "Thanks, but I think I'd stick to the city if I had a choice." I chuckled, but the moment felt too intimate. Her eyes never left mine, and something unspoken hung between us. I quickly turned away, pretending to busy myself with the hay. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something dangerous. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring out into the darkness. Candy joined me after a while, sitting close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body against mine. The silence between us was thick, the kind that begged to be filled with words neither of us dared to say. "You've been quiet today," she said softly, her hand resting on the arm of my chair, close but not quite touching. "I just had a lot on my mind," I muttered, my gaze fixed on the stars. "Nothing you need to worry about." She was quiet for a moment before speaking again, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you've noticed it too, Tiller, the way things have changed between us." My heart pounded in my chest, and I had to force myself to keep breathing. "Candy, we can't." I trailed off, unsure of how to finish that thought. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. Before I could figure it out, the familiar sound of boots crunching on gravel cut through the tension. I turned my head and saw Harland sauntering toward us, a smug grin on his face. "Evening, folks," he said, tipping his hat in Candy's direction. "Mind if I join you?" I stood up, blocking his view of Candy. "We were just heading in, Harland. Maybe another time." Harland's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "Awfully protective of her, aren't you, Tiller? Almost like she's more than just your niece." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I clenched my fists, but Candy touched my arm lightly, her fingers cool against my skin. "Let's go inside," she murmured, her voice steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We left Harland standing there, his gaze burning into our backs, but the tension between Candy and me was worse than ever. That night, everything boiled over. After Harland's insinuations, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. His words echoed in my mind, stirring up feelings I had been trying to bury. I could still feel Candy's hand on my arm, the way she had looked at me as if waiting for something, but I had no idea what to do with any of it. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at my half-empty mug of coffee, when Candy walked in. She hesitated in the doorway before walking over to the table and sitting down across from me. "Uncle Tiller," she began softly, her eyes downcast. "I need to tell you something I've been trying to keep to myself, but I can't anymore." I felt my heart start to race, but I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. She took a deep breath, then looked up at me, her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen before. I have feelings for you, more than I should." I stared at her, frozen in place. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what she was saying. I had felt it too, the pull between us, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that terrified me. "Candy," I began, my voice rough. "We can't. It's not right." "I know it's not right," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "But I can't help how I feel. I didn't come here looking for this, Tiller. I swear, but being here with you, it's like I see everything differently." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that we had to stop whatever this was before it went too far. But when I looked into her eyes, I knew I was lying to myself. I felt it too. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. "Candy, I don't know what this is, but I feel it too." The kiss happened before I'd even realized what was going on. One moment we were sitting there, hands clasped, the weight of our confession hanging between us, and the next, I was leaning across the table, my lips meeting hers. It was slow, tentative at first, but then her hands were in my hair, pulling me closer, and I lost myself in her completely. We stumbled to the bedroom, the urgency between us undeniable. It felt like years of pent-up emotion were finally being released all at once. I couldn't stop touching her, couldn't stop kissing her. She was everything I hadn't known I needed. When we finally lay together, tangled in each other's arms, I felt the peace I hadn't known in years. She was soft against me, her breath warm on my skin. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment forever, I knew it wouldn't last. The next morning, I was reminded of that when Harland showed up again, his grin even wider than before. He knocked on the door, and when I opened it, he looked past me, his gaze falling on Candy, who was standing in the kitchen. Well, Harland said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Seems like you two have gotten real cozy, haven't you?" I stepped forward, my jaw clenched. "What do you want, Harland?" Harland leaned against the doorframe, his smile fading. "People talk, Tiller, and they're going to talk a whole lot more when they find out about this little arrangement you've got going on here." Candy paled, and I could see the fear in her eyes. But I wasn't going to let Harland get to us. Not now. "Get off my property, Harland," I growled, stepping forward until we were nose to nose. "And stay away from us." Harland sneered, but he didn't argue. "This ain't over," he muttered before turning and walking away. The days after Harland's visit were tense. Every time Candy and I left the house, we felt his eyes on us, watching, waiting. But despite the fear that hung over us, there was something different between us now. We had crossed a line, one we could never uncross, but in doing so, we had found something neither of us had expected: love. One night, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Candy turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the chirping of the crickets. I glanced at her, surprised. "Leaving the farm?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, leaving this place, starting over somewhere new. Somewhere Harland can't find us." The thought of leaving the farm, the only home I had ever known, sent a pang of sadness through me. But when I looked at Candy, I knew I would leave it all behind if it meant keeping her safe. "I've thought about it," I admitted, my voice low. "But this is my home. I don't know if I could leave it." Candy looked down at her hands, her shoulders tense. "But what if staying means we can't be together?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the choice we would eventually have to make. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, and squeezed gently. "Then we'll figure it out," I said firmly. "I'm not going to let Harland or anyone else take you away from me." But even as I said the words, I knew that our time here was running out. Harland wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily, and I had no doubt he was already planning his next move. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough. As the weeks passed, Candy and I settled into a new kind of normal. Our love, though unconventional, was real, and it brought me a peace I hadn't known in years. But the threat of discovery always lingered, casting a shadow over our happiness. After everything that happened with Harland, the whispers from the nearby townsfolk, and the constant pressure of trying to keep what Candy and I had under wraps, It became clear that staying on the farm wasn't an option anymore. It wasn't just about Harland. It was the way people looked at us, the way they talked when they thought we weren't listening. The tension had grown too thick, and every day felt like walking on a tightrope, waiting for the inevitable fall. One evening, as the autumn chill began to creep into the air, I sat on the porch, staring out at the land that had been my home for as long as I could remember. The fields were golden in the fading light, the barns worn but sturdy, a testament to the years I had spent building something that now felt more like a cage than a refuge. I had given everything to this farm, but it didn't feel like home anymore, not the way it once did. Candy came out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She stood beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. We didn't need words to know what the other was thinking. We had been dancing around the idea of leaving for weeks, maybe months, but it was time. "I can't imagine leaving this place," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "But I can't imagine losing you more." She knelt beside me, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "We don't have to lose anything, Tiller. We can build something new. Together." I drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all. Years of memories, hard work, blood and sweat poured into this land. But she was right. Candy and I had already crossed the point of no return, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear us apart. I squeezed her hand, my mind made up. The next day, I called a real estate agent. By the end of the month, the farm was sold. The money didn't matter as much as the freedom that came with it. Candy and I packed up everything that held meaning to us, and together we drove out of town with no intention of looking back. We found a small country town about 200 miles away, nestled in the hills where the roads were quiet and the people didn't seem to care much about anything but their own business. It was the kind of place where you could live without being judged, where nobody asked questions unless you invited them to. It was perfect. We bought a little white house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms and a garden out back, but it felt right. We spent our first night there sitting on the porch, looking out at the stars, feeling like we had finally found our place. No Harland, no sideways glances from nosy neighbors, just peace. "This feels good, doesn't it?" Candy asked, leaning into my side. "Yeah," I said, wrapping an arm around her. "It feels like home." Over the months, we settled into our new life. The locals accepted us easily enough. Most of them just assumed we were a regular couple, and for the first time, there wasn't that cloud of suspicion or judgment hanging over us. We became part of the town's rhythm, attending the local fairs, working in the garden, and helping neighbors when they needed a hand. I found work fixing up the old barns and fences around town, while Candy started a small bakery out of the kitchen. Word spread quickly about her pies and pastries, and soon enough, she was taking orders from all over the area. People loved her, not just for her baking, but for her warmth, the way she made everyone feel like they mattered. It wasn't long before our new life felt natural. We wake up early, have breakfast together, and go about our day, always knowing we'd come back to each other by evening. We laughed a lot, fought a little, and loved fiercely. There were no more secrets, no more hiding. Just the two of us, living the life we had chosen together. Every now and then, I'd catch Candy looking at me across the dinner table, her eyes filled with that same light that had drawn me to her back on the farm. And every time, it reminded me that we had done the right thing, that selling the farm, leaving the past behind, was the best decision I had ever made. One night, as we lay in bed, the house quiet around us, she whispered, "Do you ever miss the farm?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I've got everything I need right here." She smiled, her hand resting on my chest, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was where I was meant to be. In this small town, far from the judgment of our old life, Candy and I found something more than just love. We found peace. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because whatever it was, we'd face it together.